Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Ren Bin, and today I'll be talking about my research in artificial intelligence and the governance of the technology. Before I proceed further, I wish to take this opportunity to thank the Twin Cities Innovation Alliance for inviting me to speak at the Data for Public Good conference, which is such an important event for creating the conversations and awareness that we need around emerging technologies that have and are going to have a profound impact on us. Please feel free to write any questions that you have in the chat, and I'll go through them at the end of my presentation. Right, so in my presentation today, I will first start with an introduction on where we are with AI at present, and then I'll share my methodology, why AI principles, why China, the EU, and the US. And then after that, I'll briefly touch upon the scope and limitations of my proposal before diving into my findings, which will then bring us to the policy recommendations and conclusion. So the motivation behind my research was to address the rapid advancement of AI that has been and is growing faster than regulations can keep up. To help overcome this growing policy lag, I am proposing an easy yet robust governance framework based on AI principles. Building upon this principled framework, I am recommending a list of AI policies that can help emerging AI regimes establish their own governance, as well as help existing regimes identify gaps. Regimes here could refer to organizations, companies, and even governments. So what is artificial intelligence, or AI? According to the United States Department of State, the term artificial intelligence means a machine-based system that can, for a given set of human-defined objectives, make predictions, recommendations, or decisions influencing real or virtual environments. Now, this means that AI is very much among us today, from the apps on our mobile devices recommending us songs, places to eat, movies to watch, to larger and more complex systems that are supporting business processes, public administrations, and scientific research. Now, while AI is often presented as an emerging technology with futuristic capabilities, the technology actually began all the way back in the 1950s. Now, at that time, the innovation and advancement of AI was limited by the technological capabilities available back then. And because of that, investment in AI research and development had experienced periods of ups and downs. Now, this is important to understand because when it came to the 1990s, several things happened. So first, there was an immense increase in computational power, which was then met with the emergence of big data driven by the internet. This convergence led to a breakthrough in machine learning that became AI as we know today. Since then, AI has been growing on such a trajectory that it is expected to trigger a transformative shift in society comparable to the discovery of electricity and the Industrial Revolution. To share a quote from Andrew Ng, computer scientist, "Just as electricity transformed almost everything 100 years ago, today I actually have a hard time thinking of an industry that I don't think AI will transform in the next several years." So certainly the benefits that AI is expected to bring across sectors continue to grow. For example, in transportation, AI can reduce carbon emission by increasing efficiency, eliminate human error, and enhance mobility among vulnerable populations. In healthcare, AI can increase accuracy in diagnostic scanning, disease detection, and enhance efficacy in treatment plans. Whereas in education, we see AI in learning assistants that can adapt and customize students' learning experience based on their individual progress and assistive technology to cater to different learning capabilities. So to give an idea of where we are with AI today, the 2022 AI Index report published by Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI recorded that the number of AI research published in 2021 nearly doubled from 2010, from around 160,000 to over 330,000. The global adoption rate was at 56%, while machine learning training costs continues to fall, making the technology cheaper to develop and deploy. But when we look at the number of laws passed in 2021 that mentioned AI, there were only 18. Now, sure, that was an improvement when compared with 2016 when there was only one, but it shows that we still have a ways to go. Because of the policy lag, certain harm and risk have emerged. For instance, data harvesting in a Cambridge Analytica case targeted vulnerable profiles to influence election outcomes. This impedes on people's civil liberties. AI is also being used as a powerful surveillance tool to monitor people with serious ethical implications, such as reducing political freedom and the risk of it being used as an effective authoritarian tool. Algorithmic biases have also led to discriminatory and unfair outcomes in high-stake applications such as lending decisions, healthcare plans, and in criminal justice. So, as AI becomes increasingly more prevalent in our lives, we urgently need policies that are both holistic and able to evolve with the technology over time. So it is with this intention that AI principles were selected as a guiding framework, while using governance documents from China, the European Union, and the United States as reference. The documents were then studied in a comparative analysis along with the AI principles, and then based on the findings, several policy recommendations were made. Why AI principles? A simple reason is that AI governance is an emerging field. At the time of this research for this proposal, there were only 25 countries identified that had some version of governance initiative that was considered comprehensive. On the other hand, there is an abundance of initiatives on AI ethics and principles being produced from all over the world, from private and public sectors to multi-stakeholder groups, and many using AI principles as the foundation for building AI governance. Many notable organizations, including UNESCO, have developed their own set of AI principles, with many sharing overlapping themes and keywords. For the research of this proposal, I found this really cool platform called Linking AI Principles. Now, this platform collects all the AI principle documents that are produced from all around the world, and then distilling them into key themes that are shown here as the top 11 AI principles. The intention of using this platform is to increase the objectivity and neutrality of the principles and to be as universal as possible. These principles are pretty self-explanatory, so I won't dive into them individually. Which brings us to the next question. Why China, the European Union, and the United States? So the Center of Data Innovation published a report that compared global AI progress and identified that these three regimes as the top 3 AI powers by a large margin, using key indicators such as number of AI talents, research published, data volume, number of AI companies, and adoption rate, and computing power. These indicators also suggest a higher level of AI innovation, deployment, and exposure to AI impacts. But also equally important is their immense influence over the global governance of AI. So once these 3 regimes were chosen, I then proceeded to select a representative governance initiative from each of them with the criteria that it is recently published, comprehensive, and not sector or application specific. So from China was the ethical norms for the new generation artificial intelligence, published in 2021. From the EU, the proposal for regulations in artificial intelligence, published in 2021 as well. And finally, guidance for regulations of artificial intelligence application, published in 2020. Before diving into the findings, I wish to bring your attention to certain limitations and scope of the comparative analysis. Now, by only looking at documents from China, the European Union, and the United States, it inherently limits the analysis to the specific context of these three regimes, such as their culture, politics, economy, historical context. And as mentioned earlier, AI governance is still in its early stages. There hasn't been any impact assessment on how effective or disadvantageous these proposed initiatives are. Most governance literature as well has been generated in the global north, analyzing issues from the global north. And thus the discourse and knowledge produced may not necessarily represent the global reality or accurately. The intention of this proposal is also to not be sector or application specific, and this will be reflected in the broad policy recommendations. And finally, the application of AI is so vast that it is not possible to cover all the policy areas comprehensively, and neither is that the ambition of this presentation today. So in the comparative analysis, each document was analyzed according to the 11 AI principles. For example, the principle for human was most extensively covered across all the documents, while none of them addressed the principle of long-term AI. Now, while it is very interesting to analyze how each regime was addressing each of the AI principle, those findings will not be discussed today as that would take too long. However, I will briefly touch upon a few unique points from each document that have informed the policy recommendations. So the ethical norms from China, although showed no explicit enforcement mechanism, the wording was prescriptive and came across as directives. Now, this is consistent with the paternalistic top-down governance practice in the country, which meant that the document still carries significant influence. There were indications that suggested that the government's intention to use AI as a moral governance tool, which is in line with the ambition to rebuild moral integrity in your society after the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s left a moral vacuum in the country. To achieve the ambition, the Chinese government is testing out social credit systems to regulate the behavior of citizens and businesses. The use of AI as a powerful social governance tool in a centralized government structure such as China has caused concern that it could give rise to digital authoritarianism. For example, the Chinese government use of AI as a powerful surveillance tool to monitor and control the Uyghur population in Xinjiang has resulted in devastating consequences. The EU AI Act adopted a risk-based approach by categorizing AI systems into 4 distinct levels of risk: minimal, limited, high, and unacceptable. They recognize that this approach could potentially restrict certain activities. However, the European Commission is focused and driven to create a comprehensive and coordinated effort to regulate AI in the region and to build a strong EU brand of AI that is centered on ethics and human rights. The US guidance also recommended a risk-based method, but strongly cautioned against adopting a precautionary approach similar to the EU, citing that such an approach can stifle innovation and prevent people from enjoying the full benefits of AI. Instead, the US guidance recommends applying cost-benefit analysis as a rule of thumb, which is consistent with the country's long tradition of using cost-benefit analysis in policymaking. Now, while the documents from China and European Union favored a comprehensive and centralized governance framework, the US government is delegating this task to individual federal agencies. Something that was also noticeable in a US guidance as well was a clear rhetoric of an AI race, which is something that researchers have cautioned against as it could instigate an actual AI race, which in turn could lead to harmful trade-offs and potentially real conflicts. Other themes that stood out from the 3 documents, China and the United States specifically highlighted the rise of an anti-competitive market due to the deployment of AI. Both documents explicitly outline the need to curb such power concentration among large online entities. And they recommend prohibiting anti-competitive practices that could prevent new market entrants from thriving. Lastly, all three documents express strong ambitions to influence global AI governance through standard setting and innovation. So based on the AI principles and the findings from the comparative analysis, I am proposing 7 policy recommendations to address all 11 AI principles. First, we need to implement a centralized AI governance framework to ensure that there are no regulatory gaps across sectors and applications. Regulatory efforts should be risk-based, similar to what the European Union recommended, so that regulations are proportionate. Governance efforts should also ensure that the development and deployment of AI is not just human-centered, but also environmentally sustainable. To support the centralized AI governance framework, there should also be an equally comprehensive and robust data protection regime. Apart from protecting privacy, measures should also be in place to ensure that data quality is upheld to increase fairness and accurate outcomes. If these conditions are met, a digital commons such as one proposed by UNESCO should be established to facilitate data sharing between private and public sectors to accelerate research and innovation. The use of transparency as a compliance mechanism was observed across all 3 documents. For example, in testing, there should be clear reports describing the benefits and risks of an AI system, or which AI principles it enables or inhibits. Audit trails should be embedded in AI to enable traceability that can then help collect evidence to find out what went wrong when failure occurs. People should also have the right to know and be informed when they're interacting with AI, especially with systems that can detect emotions or are manipulative. Testing should be required to enforce safety and compliance. While the European Union only suggested testing high-risk AI, I urge testing on both high and low-risk AI. We have seen how low-risk algorithms, such as those found in search engines, can still produce biased outcomes that have led to harmful impact on vulnerable populations. Now, to balance the strict requirements, regulatory sandboxes should be provided to encourage innovation. Validation and verification should also be conducted by independent oversight committees to uphold objectivity and safety. Additionally, elements from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, international human rights law, and AI principles should also be integrated into the testing framework. Countries should collaborate with global and local stakeholders in advancing AI and in AI policy making. Globally, we should invest in accelerating global solutions for grand challenges such as climate change and increase technological compatibility across borders, and most importantly, to diminish the risk of an AI race from emerging. When engaging public participation in AI policymaking, it is important to ensure diversity among stakeholders so that regulatory efforts are equitable. This will help promote public trust and accelerate the adoption of AI. There should also be a strategic and long-term outlook when investing in AI research. While there are numerous ongoing research on how to optimize AI benefits, there are also many uncertainties in its long-term impact on humans and the environment, especially when it comes to advanced AI. As mentioned earlier, AI governance is still an emerging domain. Impact assessment should be conducted to determine which governance models work and which don't. We should also monitor how the technology is affecting and potentially changing our governance structure, whether a more centralized or decentralized structure would suit the technology more efficiently. The unique characteristics in AI also introduce new challenges in cybersecurity, such as those used in safety components. An attack could inflict direct harm on humans. And meanwhile, the prevalence of AI in society increases the risk of large-scale attacks constituting a national security issue. The last recommendation on this list is to implement distributive and redistributive policies. Both China and the United States have urged countering the growing concentration of wealth and power generated by AI deployment. There should be stronger antitrust laws that are tech company specific. For instance, identifying data and users as resource and wealth in order to prevent data monopoly. The intense accumulation of wealth should be redistributed by imposing progressive tax on companies. And in the long run, as AI generates higher outputs with lower inputs, basic income models or negative income tax should be considered to ensure that society can continue to thrive. In developing countries, economists have proposed pre-distributed policies such as minimum wage to prevent inequality from expanding further domestically and internationally. Now, during the research and policy analysis for this proposal, a couple of policy areas related to the impact of AI emerged that did not directly correspond to the AI principles. However, given their implication to society, it is important to include them in AI policymaking. So the first one is we should increase AI literacy and education to help people navigate a future percolated with AI by incorporating AI skills and knowledge into our education systems. There is a need to cultivate AI talents by removing barriers and encouraging diverse individuals to pursue this path. We need to identify job trends to train the AI talents we'll need and ensure that they are trained in multidisciplinary fields so that future development of AI is holistic and not just from a technical standpoint. Increasing AI literacy can also reduce the information asymmetry that is growing between tech companies and the public. This is necessary to ensure that we can continue to uphold our civic responsibility of keeping AI actors accountable and to preserve our self-agency in a democratic society. And finally, we should anticipate future job demands. Research has suggested various AI implications on the labor market, from displacement to reinstatement, and AI only affecting tasks rather than jobs. And most recently, there has been clearer direction that AI should be designed as an assistant rather than a replacement for job roles. Regardless, there is a need to provide upskilling and reskilling programs to help workers with the transition. For instance, creative and social skills have been identified as most resilient against automation and thus should be emphasized. In the long run, as advanced AI takes over more and more tasks, producing higher outputs with lower inputs, the perception of jobs may change and people may seek other ways to find fulfillment in their lives. In the end, AI is anticipated to bring a transformative shift in society. And therefore, we urgently need a centralized and comprehensive governance framework based on AI principles to minimize its risk and maximize its benefits to humans and the environment. Due to its unique characteristics and capabilities, global collaborations and public participation will be essential to accelerate solutions and ensure that its benefits and risk are distributed equitably. So the next step for governing bodies now are to implement legally binding laws on AI policies and establish visible standards and guidelines for the AI community to progress in. So on that note, I will close my presentation with the following remark. The decisions that we make today will define not just the future of AI, but also the future of humanity. Thank you. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. I will stop sharing so I can see everyone.
Thank you, Ren.
That's it. Thank you very much. Very in-depth and very comprehensive and concise. I really appreciate it. Some of my questions are, how can we, as organizations like TCIA who work in this domain, oh, I'm not on camera, sorry, who work in this domain, who are working as enablers, educators, equip others to understand what this looks like in practice and where they can begin at local government levels to push up and from a ground position of advocacy in what this looks like, because our research that we done with JDL has showed no framework. We benchmarked Europe like you did and China, and they have more frameworks in place or emergent frameworks discussions that we have yet to approach. So
Mhm.
that's my question. How can we enable this to make it accessible for grassroots organizations and enablers like us who are building out this infrastructure to help lead the way, though we don't always advocate for policy, to be able to lead the way to support those who do?
I think that is a really great question. It's something that I was thinking about today as well in relations to TCIA and your role in what you're doing actually right now. And I was trying to think, because this is a very very emerging field. There is not a lot of examples or good case practices that we can look at and learn from. So I was thinking there are a lot of organization popping up that is quite similar to TCIA in different places around the world and also in the US. And I thought about whether or not it would make sense for these organizations to create a network to learn from, good practices from each other. Some of them are advocating for responsible tech job boards that can encourage people to seek out these kind of jobs, but also thinking your connection with education and with university, that I'm always an advocate for education. That's where changes usually start. And I was thinking that this is something that I was also advocating for in my policy is AI literacy, that we can start with, workshops, reaching out to outreach programs, reach out to young people, students, university, college students, just to start that awareness and literacy to understand. And I think you also mentioned earlier that this is something that you have been doing, how was it social media or algorithm is affecting us, and to understand how technology is affecting us, because this is not a common knowledge for a lot of people. And this is something that we are moving very fast into a future where, all our decisions are very much affected by technology. There's very few decisions that aren't anymore.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We should make a note of those orgs and figure out, how we can collaborate possibly to activate a conversation or a roundtable to begin that type of work within the problem-solving ecosystem that can help drive change. So I really appreciate that and have an action item to follow up with you to help build that out.
Yes, that's on my list too. I would like to follow up with both of you too.
All right. Thank you.
Feel free to unmute or write in the chat if you have any questions.
How can you help align the technology with the user? Because it feels like a lot of times artificial intelligence is brought out as this one size fits all. And I look at somebody like my 80-year-old mom. She does not want a refrigerator to tell her when there's food that needs to be thrown out. I mean, that is absolutely not in her wheelhouse, and would be very uncomfortable and find that intrusive. And I mean, I'm picking a silly example, but not every implementation is going to work for every target audience. So how do we adjust for that?
This is something I think it's more related to how AI companies are developing their products and the user experience. And this is actually it's a pretty established. I would say that, for example, increasing the stakeholder participation, not just in the policy making, but also the involvement in the development. This is something that has also been advocated by other researchers, to involve more of the people who will be impacted, the users and users who will be using these systems, to be part of that process, to take more of their feedback and inputs, to understand, not just because there's a lot of things that, developers who are developing the system may not necessarily think of, that the people, the end users, would have a better, different perspective and opinion that they can bring to the table. So absolutely, yeah. This is where the public participation would come in very essential. I see a question in the chat. That is a very specific question, I think, to data privacy. Data broker, do you have, I'm not sure, I'm not very familiar with data broker to begin with, but I have briefly, I think, read about in some of my data and privacy law classes that it's very different. And this is something that I personally think that the United States can do better when it comes to data privacy and governance, because, for example, in the EU model, the privacy and the governance, the protection follows the data. It doesn't just, it's not limited to just a specific transaction. That is the case in the US. That's why there are not enough laws, comprehensive laws, to cover across all the data, because, for example, we may input something in Facebook, but that data can be used further in other platforms and it travels and travels. So in the US, the law would cover a very specific and narrow platform, whereas in the EU, their protection regimes would follow the data wherever it goes. So if you have set a certain, limitation to how your data can be used, then that would follow your data on whichever platform it is. And hence, that's why I'm also pushing for or advocating for a comprehensive data protection regime. I hope that answers your question.
I had a question. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm in my car. Sorry, but I pulled over because I had to ask this question. I want to ask you about, how do you reconcile that it's a known fact that the policy lags far behind the development of technology, and also specifically here in the United States, there isn't that AI literacy and fluency. So legislators are passing legislation or making policies about technologies they don't conceptually understand. So how would you address just the lack of the literacy to make these governance and guidelines? And also, by the time it gets passed, we've already moved on to the next thing and next level in AI. If you could talk about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish there was a quick solution, but unfortunately, there isn't a quick solution to this. It's simply that the technology is unfortunately growing faster than the regulations can keep up, than the public can keep up. And hence there is acknowledged a growing asymmetry in what the tech companies know and what the public knows. And this information asymmetry has shifted the power influence over to the tech companies. I've thought about this a lot, and it always brings me back to education, AI awareness, literacy, AI literacy, that it all comes back down to that, to be able to bring that change. It will not be a fast change, but it is definitely necessary to start now than later, to start teaching kids, young students, college kids, on what it means that this technology, where it's going in the future, how it's going to impact society, to foster more advocates and people who understand how the technology is going to work. I myself am not trained in computer science, but it doesn't mean that you cannot advocate for these changes in the AI policy. So it's not going to be a fast, easy solution, unfortunately, but it is something that people are starting to take notice and to work towards. And I think this is where the work of educating outreach program is going to be so important to bring that kind of grassroots changes.
That's a good question.
Sorry, did someone say?
I just said that was a good question. I was building off what Aura said. I have one later, but I want to make sure everyone else gets a chance because we can connect later.
Right. I think and I'll take another question in the chat. What are your thoughts on decentralized NGOs, auditors who can create fast feedback change?
I wrote that. That's what I was going to say.
Would you mind saying more about your question?
Yeah. So far, what has happened, and we see this pattern a lot with legislation. We got the Federal Reserve, who has a responsibility for auditing the government, right? And financial institutions, and the people there are supposed to have a barrier between them where they have to and say we own these stocks, so we have these investments, but they don't. There's rarely any accountability, so they wind up passively supporting each other. And my intent was to say, how about standalone NGOs who have fast feedback loops, who can have the ability to audit, have the tech to be able to maintain pace and innovation with these for-profit entities, and be able to have a fast feedback loop to affect change because they can see patterns within the algorithm, to redress harm, and to be able to escalate that versus it being centralized, and then eventually the intelligent businesses adapt to mitigate the centralized approach.
Is this, I'm trying to think, because I'm stuck with the term auditors. Are you thinking specifically on auditing, like algorithmic auditing organizations?
Yes, like specifically, let's say if TCA had an arm that engaged in algorithmic justice, and we look at those patterns, look for harm, look to redress that harm, look for hidden biases, watch it in the marketplace and how it interacts with the public, and can identify outcomes that we then have the ability, like the NSTB, right? If an automated vehicle had an accident today, they pause everything, a group goes in and takes a look, and that's just one car. They don't need 100 cars. They don't need a large data set, just one incident. If a plane goes down, because of its scale of impact, they grounded a whole fleet. And this has that same level of severity to me, that independent organizations should have the ability to be able to ring a call to say, hey, this algorithm needs to be recalled, it needs to cease and desist, it needs to be paused, it needs to be addressed. Your thoughts on the ways that organizations can start to maybe help fast track policies, because the government is slow to do so.
Yes, absolutely. I think nonprofit organizations have a big role to play in this kind of just taking the baton and just running with it, not waiting. Because if we were to wait for regulations and policies to pass, I think that would take too long. And so absolutely, like, nonprofit organizations have a large role to play. In fact, when I was researching on algorithm biases, maybe you're also familiar, there's already some algorithmic auditing organizations out there. And I thought that was really interesting, that this could potentially open up a new market for algorithmic auditing companies as well. So not just nonprofit, but potentially even for profit firms. So yes, absolutely going ahead and not waiting for the regulations to catch up with it. I'll take a question from Angelina.
Hi, thanks. As you might be able to tell, I'm in a high school at the Bell, so if it's loud, that is why. And from this lens, have you seen anything that has been useful in other communities or around the world that have been engaging the stakeholders at those levels in ways that are filled with hope and not fear? That is my message of the day, is that I think a lot of this, when I talk to the young people around me, it's either that stuff is really scary and I don't want to engage in scary stuff and I just want to use it for fun, or it is a sense that it's so big that it's I don't have a voice in it and I never will. And so what's the point? Have you seen any kinds of approaches to engagement that have kind of helped people get engaged?
Yes, I think, and this is one of the organizations that I had in mind for TCIA as well, where I think they're called Humane Technology. They're the same organization that made that documentary on Netflix called The Social Media? Now I cannot remember the name, but
Social Dilemma.
Social Dilemma, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think they're called the Humane Technology, or something along those lines. I can search it up and drop it in the chat. They have come up with toolkits for parents, teachers, on how to, and also for students themselves, on how to understand social media, how social media impact us, how they work, how advertisers get money out of social media. So we understand all these things that's going on behind a social media platform and how it works and how that's impacting us to the level that parents, teachers, and students can understand and use that as self-agency to empower themselves to take hold of their social media usage. Are you familiar with I'm trying to find it now, just hold on a second. Touch. There you go. So I'm just going to drop it in the chat here, then everyone can have a look. So this is just one of there are quite a few organizations out there that are quite like TCIA, who are grassroots coming up to try and address these kind of the impact of emerging technologies. Unfortunately, there's no very structured way and very structured framework of how people are handling it and addressing it. So it's still very organic at this point of time.
Thank you.
I think to build on that, if I may, a lot of what has happened, based on the research out of Stanford, and the ability for them to learn how to influence basically social engineering, was done without permission. People didn't realize that they were being engineered to accept and be influenced by AI and its impact. In this domain, how about lifting that up? I recall that you said that, one of the calls for demands is that we list when we're interacting with AI, but maybe it's deeper that we collectively did not need to address social engineering and start to identify models that are not threatening, but also the ways that we can use it to have a positive impact on our society, on climate, and juxtaposition to build off what I think Angelina had said earlier, to bring the hope of what is possible. Because there's that juxtaposition. If they can engineer it to increase consumption, which is what they're doing to the marketing part that you just raised, then we should also be looking at this positive forcing functions ability to be able to help address positive impactful change that can help reverse or mitigate some of the harms. And what are your thoughts on addressing the fact that first, social engineering happened without consent, and it will always happen almost without consent. And then second, how can we, in our role and others, play a protective factor or agency role in this space? So 2 questions there.
When you say social engineering, what are you thinking of specifically?
So in Stanford School of Design, there are classes on how you influence people to keep rolling through. Like Netflix has now, it'll automatically use AI to give you a list. And if you're watching it, it'll automatically move to another movie that you are watching. That keeps you on autopilot. Right. And so they've engaged in the ways to keep people on autopilot, to keep them from actually consciously making a decision. That's what, and a lot of people believe Apple did when it said, hey, do you want this app to track you? Because it was passively tracking you. Once you became aware that it was tracking you, more people opted out of it. And so how to start to force the conversation to get at those passive social engineering that is keeping us consumers versus the active technologists and the role that we can play in that. And then the other side is how can we leverage that to have positive outcomes?
Right, absolutely. I like that there's always positive outcome. I mean, technology is always a double-edged sword. It's going to bring both benefits and risk. It's just how we are regulating and how we're using it. Social engineering, so that makes me think of recommender algorithms, right? Those that keep us on the platforms, on the social media. I think, again, it always comes back down to the awareness and the understanding of how they are affecting us, our choices to stay on the platform, to keep clicking, to keep using their technology. And I think this, again, comes back a lot down to the understanding of how technology works, how AI works. AI is not, I like to say that AI is not scary. If you understand how it's affecting you, you can take charge. That's where you gain back your self-agency. And that's why AI literacy and education is so important to equip us with this control back, that we know that this is what I'm doing now on this platform. I'm clicking here because, I want to do this and not because the algorithm is encouraging me to do so. But at the same time, this is something that I think what was my point? Something to think about is again that the European Union GDPR, what's it called? Governance GDPR, the data protection regime is really good, that they do make sure they're very clear that you're not going to, what was it? I kind of lost my chain of thought there. That your data is not going to be continuously be abused or to keep you on board a certain way. And I think that kind of trust would be greatly helpful when it comes to AI systems, to be able to know that, I know that this system is not going to abuse my time or use my data in ways that I am not aware of, that that you can always, say no, that, okay, I want to stop here. This is where I want to stop, to be able to have that control. So I think both the data protection is very important, and as well as the AI literacy to understand how the system works. Thank you. Yes. General
Thank you.
data protection regulation.
Thank you. So self-data agency is what I just named it in my sense, that we have the ability, the system calibrates to ensure that for the public's good and the public interest, that all data is, the individuals have a right to know when it starts being collected, and the ability to know that it is not shared across, it's not joint powers agreement, there's no backdoor channels, and
Exactly.
that they can understand and mitigate the harm. And if there is a breach, then there should be a pause. I'm adding the last part that we should be able to stop it, and there should be penalties involved. Okay.
Yes, the ability to say stop, like this is where I want my data to end, to stop here, to have that control and that option, I think is very important, which we currently don't have in the United States. We could take one more or two more questions if anyone has any more. I would add that as more of a personal note that, AI is going to be, I think it's going to have it is going to have a huge impact. And I'm actually optimistic. I know this is, a lot of people are more like pessimistic about how AI is, but I think it's going to be able to bring a lot of solutions that we don't have today. If you just look at what it's doing in scientific research, in healthcare treatment, I think they're doing like really big stride, and really, there's a lot of good that can come out of it. But people just have to be really aware and conscious of what the potential risks are, and to be able to mitigate that in time, to address it. And if a risk or a harm occur, to be able to address that as soon as possible, to have those structure and framework in place. Right now, they are not in place. So when some harm occurs, no one knows what to do, where to go, or maybe people don't even know that there are harm occurring and how it's affecting us. And I think that's where it's so important that people understand and not be afraid, because the more we understand, the less that we will fear. Thank you. Any last questions? Feel free to type in the chat or ask, unmute.
All right.
Well, I guess we could wrap it up so people can take a little break before we all go back to the main stage for our closing remarks for today. So, well, thank you everyone for being here today and for asking all of the great questions. I love presenting this research because every time I get very different set of questions, and it's always bringing different perspective to how I think about how these policies could work and what the next steps should be. So thank you very much for that. I really, really appreciate this. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.